No matter how you slice it, it is very clear what this document proves. Remember, I started talking about the Illuminati in 2009, and shortly after, around that time, the psychological warfare against me started. Then, I believe it was maybe 2014, something like that. I'll have to check it, I'll put it in the comments. I made the series ISIS is More Righteous Than America. This document, which supposedly was originally written in the 80s, 1980, and then it was touched up by the author because it refers to things that happened in 2003. And so it must be at least from 2003. For example, this phrase, this part. It was with some fascination that I saw specific of its prescriptions applied during the first Gulf War, and recently even more obvious during the 2003 invasion of Iraq. In both instances, extreme psyop was directed both against the object of the attack and upon U.S. domestic public perception and opinion. In 2003, to the extent of embedding journalists with military units to inevitably channel their perspectives and perceptions. Embedding is in quotations, and I'll put this, on this pictures on the screen. This document proves beyond any doubt that well after MKUltra ended, psych op was being applied. Before I even found this document, I was talking about how there was an evolution of, MKUltra. Okay, and MKUltra was a psyop, and the title of this document is From Psyop to Mind War, and supposedly part of it is about the ethics of psychological operations. Ethics, written by a Satanist. And any person who's a high-level Satanist, for example, knows very well that Satanists are tricksters. So there was something more devious, more sinister, being relayed here, being communicated here by Satanists to each other. And if you read carefully, you think about the deeper implications. It is saying using satanic philosophy and trickery is more ethical than murder. It's really discussing the most practical way to bring in a satanic agenda. So as I was talking about the things that make up American society, secret societies pretty much founded this nation. They have been involved in this nation on every level since its beginning. And the ideologies of Satanists are part of Western philosophy, and I've been trying to explain this many, many times. Western philosophy is derived from satanic philosophy and Luciferian doctrine. Just look at the letters from Pike to Mazzini. It makes it clear that what they've been doing is trying to incrementally bring in the Luciferian doctrine. And because most people would not be okay with that at this point, it becomes a matter of national security. Therefore, psychological warfare may be applied to anybody who is interfering in this agenda. And since it might cause civil war and unrest, they must be silenced before they can relay this information to the masses in a cogent and consumable manner. So it goes on, this document has the details. So the reason why I'm calling this series Psychological Warfare, is this. Psychological warfare is the coordination and use of all means, including moral and physical, by which the end is attained. Other than those of recognized military operations, but including the psychological exploitation of the result of those recognized military actions which tend to destroy the will of the enemy, to achieve victory and to damage his political or economic capacity to do so, which tend to deprive the enemy of the support, assistance, or sympathy of his allies or associates, or of neutrals, or to prevent his acquisition of such support, assistance, or sympathy, or which tend to create, maintain, or increase the will to victory of our own people and allies, and to acquire, maintain, or to increase the support, assistance, and sympathy of neutrals. So everything that they're doing isn't just satanic and evil. It is doing exactly what is described here. By having homosexuals, drug me and sexually assault me and violate me and to record it, allows them to debunk me. We all know that it is not cool to be played out, to be made to seem to be homosexual, especially if you're speaking out against it. Then you don't have any allies. You alienate all the people who see it the same way as you about homosexuals. And you alienate yourself from homosexuals themselves because you've been speaking bad about them, so you have nowhere to turn. Therefore, you've been deprived the support, assistance, or sympathy of allies, associates, and neutrals. And you've been prevented from acquiring this support. Just like it says here. And part of the military actions they've done in the past is MK Ultra. Those are some of the recognized military actions which tend to destroy the will of the enemy, to exploit these. They're exploiting what they learned in MK Ultra, and they're exploiting the fact that other people are going to be afraid to be targeted by this program as well. This, I cannot urge you enough. I've pointed out many times that even back in 2012, I talk about how they are, teaming up against me. They're running a psychological operation, is how I put it, before I started using the term gang stalking. And when I used the term gang stalking, because so many people were talking about gang stalking, I thought perhaps it was the smart way to put it, but it wasn't. It isn't. Because it kind of puts this conspiratorial term, it replaces a logical term, the euphemism, psychological operations, with a conspiratorial kind of conspiracy related and associated. People associate that phrase with conspiracy, gang stalking. I try to use government harassment, but psychological warfare gets to the meat of it, and it thoroughly describes who is doing it and who is supporting them. Of course, universities and educations, just like with MK Ultra, support psychological warfare being done by the military. That's why University of Phoenix, the university I attended, gives a discount to the military. Of course, local law enforcement and intelligence agents and gang members who, some of them are in the military or were in the military and have family members in the military, of course they're utilized. This is psychological warfare. And what is so interesting is that this is a recognized military operation. And that is in the document. They say that is part of what they're going to exploit, or what they're going to utilize against people for its efficacy. Mind war is the deliberate, aggressive convincing of all participants in a war that we will win the war. And how do they do that? By saying things to me, like, you're not really the top martial artist, even though they don't accept my challenge. They know that I am the top martial artist. But part of what they're doing is trying to convince me that I'm not as smart or talented as I claim to be, or that as I quote unquote think I am, so that I don't think I can win. And so that people around me who might join my cause don't think that they can win either. On the other hand, it does not seem to have reassured the sensibilities of the Soviets, who in 1980 described the U.S. Army PSYOP as including unpardonable methods of ideological sabotage, including not just blackmail, provocation, and terror. So the Soviets described this PSYOP as terrorism, for all intents and purposes. This is in 1980, 21 years before 9/11. They said America is terrorizing its political opposition, its political dissidents, foreign and domestic. Anyone who gets in their way. And remember, this document is from 1980, and it's done again in 2003 at least. And ironically, it's also important to note that I was sympathetic to communist ideas. I wasn't completely a communist. You might say I was a pinko commie. But I talk about redistributing the wealth and the exploitation of the labor force. I use the word communism many times. I even had described myself as a communist many times. And another thing in quotations here, I don't know if I'm going to take pictures for all this, but you can look up the document from Psyop to Mind War, The Psychology of Victory by Colonel Paul E. Valley, Commander, with Major Michael A. Aquino, Psyop Research and Analyst Team Leader. It talks about a great need for a synonym which would be used in peacetime that would not shock the sensibilities of a citizen of democracy. So Western demonocracy, or democracy, because there's a difference. A true democracy, perhaps, which probably never plays out that way, has ideas that are pretty respectable. But how it plays out in a secret society run world, in a world with crony capitalism and so on, is that the people truly don't have a say. There's a massive psych op being run on us all, and that's what's referred to in this as well, how the military embedded its units with journalists who would then portray a favorable message. And I'm sure some of you are familiar that Bush spent over $1 billion on quote-unquote media spin. So of course, on record, the media is controlled, the controlled media. And of course, it's for psychological purposes. A lot of you don't understand why I'm not just harsh on psychiatrists, but psychologists and all of mental health as well. It's because, when some psychologists speak out against psychiatry, it's because that arguably psychologists are worse for society than psychiatrists, because these are psychological operations and they don't always include drugs, And that's another way they sought to keep me from getting sympathy, by playing me out as crazy. Absolutely. And absolutely the CIA is involved. They're concerned with these things. The CIA might be the most concerned group or entity in America when it comes to politics. I mean, these people assassinate people in foreign countries and prop up other people, and they go to great lengths and they fight dirty. For that reason, they may be the most concerned with politics, and the military is just part of it. They're military intelligence. The military is part of it. The Marines, the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, what have you. And of course, the National Guard is a part of the Army, part of the armed forces as well. And what do? They quell uprisings, and they do it in a very harsh manner. For those of you who remember, who were alive during the riots, I'm sure you remember the National Guard was very violent and very ruthless when it came to stifling dissent and putting down revolt. So yes, this is from the Psychological Warfare playlist, and I hesitated to make another playlist. I wanted to end it, but and that's interesting too, how I wanted to end it when they managed to covertly drug me. But when they didn't manage to drug me, not only does the martial arts and the white key come out better, but I no longer want to end it. I wish to keep going. And I'll end this by saying this. Does that not fall exactly in line with mind war is the deliberate, aggressive convincing of all participants in a war that we will end that war, that we will win that war, which, is about convincing you not to continue to fight. Thank you. This document proves beyond any doubt that well after MK Ultra ended, psych op was being applied. Before I even found this document, I was talking about how there was an evolution of, MK Ultra. Okay, and MK Ultra was a psyop, and the title of 1980, and then it was touched up by the author because it refers to things that happened in 2003, and so it must be at least from 2003. For example, this phrase. This part. It was with some fascination that I saw specific of its prescriptions applied during the first Gulf War, and recently even more obvious during the 2003 invasion of Iraq. In both instances, extreme psyop was directed both against the object of the attack and upon U.S. domestic public perception and opinion. In 2003, to the extent of embedding journalists with military units to inevitably channel their perspectives and perceptions. Embedding is in quotations, and I'll put this on this pictures on the screen. No matter how you slice it, it is very clear what this document proves. Remember, I started talking about the Illuminati in 2009, and shortly after, or around that time, the psychological warfare against me started. Then, I believe it was maybe 2014, something like that. I'll have to check it, I'll put it in the comments. I made the series, ISIS is More Righteous Than America. This document, which supposedly was originally written in the 80s,